Can I help you? Do you need something? Okay, fine. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player and so on. My name is Devilor, and today I just want to ask the question, is solo play killing MMORPGs? Now, that's obviously a little bit of a sensationalist title. I don't necessarily think that the ability to have done something by yourself in an MMO is going to cause the death of MMOs entirely. But there's certainly been a trend over recent years, and especially with some of the changes that have happened in WoW recently, as well as a couple of other games that we're going to talk about as we get through this video a little bit. There's definitely been this trend away from needing like a guild, essentially, needing a dedicated group of friends to play alongside you as you're going through, and especially as you start progressing into endgame in MMOs. So I really just want to ask the question and sort of analyze that thought of, is that causing the MMORPG aspect, the MMO aspect in particular of an MMORPG to sort of fade away a little bit? Is the part of the game that made it need to be MMO in the first place starting to kind of fall off as a little bit as a result of that? And if it's not outright killing the game, is it changing them into something else entirely to the point where maybe it's not really recognizable as an MMORPG anymore? Now, before I go any further, I'm going to do the annoying YouTuber thing and ask you to please remember to hit that subscribe button. This is a brand new channel that we're starting up here to move Sounds Good Makes Sense over to. So subscribing to the channel is extremely, immensely helpful. Any momentum that this channel can get early on in its lifetime, just for algorithm reasons, is super, super important. So if you have the ability to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. Leave a comment, share it to your friends, do whatever else. All that annoying YouTuber stuff, just go watch some other YouTube video, and then everything they said about what you're supposed to do, just apply that to this one, because I'm not very good at these scripts sort of things. So anyway, solo play, MMORPGs, what's going on here? And why is this something that's been on my mind so much recently? And the biggest reason for that, I think you can probably kind of make a guess already, is the fact that delves were added in the War Within. And I have enjoyed delves quite a bit. There was a long period of time I was making sure I had like 3 or 4 characters that I was making sure to at least complete their 4 max tier delves every single week. I was making sure all of these characters, I was getting those max delves done. Apparently I can't say it properly, but we're going to continue on anyway. I was getting those max delves done. I was clearing everything out of there, making sure that I was getting all of my my little currencies and everything out of it. And I was making sure I was doing that every single week. And that was something that was keeping the gameplay loop going for me in that time period. But the thing that's been causing me to think about this a lot more lately is basically as soon as I kind of just got tired of doing delves, I pretty much immediately stopped logging in. I just was like, okay, well, I'm not doing delves anymore. Unless a friend wants to do something with me in WoW, which has happened. I am still poking at WoW from time to time when I'm playing with friends. But unless someone asks me to log in and do something with them, I'm just not playing the game anymore. There's no more impetus for me to log in and go do anything because I felt like I've kind of done with delves. I wasn't really feeling the pug experience going through Mythic Plus this time around, and I don't have a raid guild or anything like that, so there was kind of no reason for me to log in. And that made me feel a little bit like, a lot actually, that made me feel fairly substantially that if I had like a group of friends that we were pushing progression together with, or if I had other people that wanted to get things done and needed my help to do them, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is a friend of mine, I'm happy to go help you clear this or whatever. You're trying to farm this piece of gear out of M+, or we have this raid guild, we're working together to defeat these bosses. Even if I don't need anything off those bosses, maybe I'll help you kill them. If I'd had any of those factors compared to comparing this expansion to expansions that I've played in the past, I would usually have one of those factors in place where there was something that was like, okay, I'm logging in, not necessarily because I have anything on my particular checklist that needs to get done, but I'm logging in because I have a bunch of friends here, and these are people that I want to play with, and they want things to do, and they have things that they would like, they have things that they would like to get done. And so I'll log in and I'll play with my friends. And this expansion, I've ended up in pretty heavily a solo experience. There was this early on when the War Within first released, where there was a group of us that were playing together fairly regularly. But as time went on, and I just haven't wanted to commit time to full-scale raiding in this expansion, a lot of those people ended up playing with other groups, and I've kind of just been left to my own devices, which again was fine because of delves up until the point where I felt like I kind of just don't really want to do this anymore. And before I move on and start analyzing what's going on there a little bit too much and really digging into what all that could mean, I want to bring up one other example of recent time that I've also got a fair amount of extensive experience with at this point, and that is the game Dune Awakening. This is a game that it's not really an MMORPG. Early on, they were calling it an MMORPG. Nowadays, they just kind of call it. In fact, they were calling it an MMO for a while, and then they kind of stopped calling it an MMO because everyone assumed that meant you had like action bars and all of that sort of stuff going on, and it's not really what that game is. It's a survival crafter, but it has this sort of MMO aspect to it. It has a lot of the same sort of bones that an MMORPG might have, especially once you reach endgame. The intention for endgame in Dune Awakening is there's this zone called the Deep Desert, and this is like this endgame. All of the most important like endgame resources are available in the Deep Desert. Some of them are only available in the Deep Desert. Things like what you need for plastanium, which is like the final tier of metals that you use to make items and so on. All this stuff is only available in the Deep Desert. There's a bunch of patterns and so on. And there are technically other ways to get pretty much everything that can come in the Deep Desert, but that usually relies on either trading with other players or getting it in very, very limited quantities elsewhere, or getting lucky with certain other systems that would give you like one of something, whereas you could be farming this more extensively in the Deep Desert. Basically, the intention was the Deep Desert is the end game zone, and that's where you spend the majority of your time once you've reached the final tier of progression. Now, the hurdle that the game had when it first came out is that the end game zone is PvP. It was, at least at the time of release, it was almost entirely PvP active. So you could be attacked and people could shoot you down. They could shoot down your ornithopter. They could take some of your stuff. It wasn't nearly as much stuff as everybody thought it could. But you could potentially lose things, and you could potentially be attacked while you were out there by other players. Now, there's a billion reasons why this didn't work out, and many of them have absolutely nothing to do with the fact that it was PvP, and instead have to do with the fact that like there's just a lot that the game did not explain to players very well. The thing I just mentioned a second ago, where the stuff you could lose was actually relatively minor compared to what everyone thought. People were going out in the Deep Desert assuming that they could lose absolutely everything. The reality was you could lose, it was almost nothing. It was basically outside of certain other extraneous circumstances that I'm not going to go into. More than likely, if you had the worst case scenario out there, you could end up losing like your ornithopter or something. If things got really bad, there was ways that you could end up losing everything that you had on you. But for the most part, if you were careful and you knew what you were doing and you understood how that zone worked, you weren't actually risking that much going out there. That's one of the big problems that I had, was just generally not making the player aware of what any of the heck I just said actually means. And again, I'm not going to go into extreme detail on it here because none of that's really relevant. The bigger problem I feel that it had is that the majority of the experience that you had playing Dune up until that point was almost exclusively soloable. So while there were groups of people like myself who were playing with other players, we had a group of like 3 of us that we were basically doing everything together as we were playing throughout the majority of the early game in Dune Awakening. There were a lot of players who loaded up the game, got into it, immediately felt like, oh yeah, this is completely solo friendly. I can do absolutely everything by myself. And yeah, some bits and pieces of it were a bit grindy as a result of that, but honestly, they weren't ever that bad. There were a couple of like little pockets of areas that were supposedly PvP as well, but very few people ever actually ran into any PvP in those areas. And if you did, you just kind of ran away from them and it didn't matter. It was very easy to escape from those situations. So for the most part, 90% of the gameplay up until the point where you reached endgame felt very, very solo friendly. And so the result was, regardless of what the actual developer intent was for this Deep Desert final zone, a significant number of players reached that final zone and immediately went, wait a second, the game has now, for my experience, completely changed. They have gone from, I can kind of solo everything, and yeah, it's going to take me a little longer than if I had friends, but that's fine. I don't feel like it's necessary for me to go out and make connections with other people in game or get other people to come play this with me. I'm enjoying my time as a solo player. Then they reach the end game and they go, this is no fun. There's nothing enjoyable about it. I have to go out into this deep desert. I have to risk getting attacked all the time. And much of the there's a lot of things that can happen in the end game that you could theoretically be working towards that pretty much do require you to go out there in a group. Like if again, I'm going to just summarize some of this, but if you want to go out with a carrier and a sandcrawler and you don't have a bunch of people flying interference for you in ornithopters, it ultimately it's like a 6 or 8 person job to be able to go out and farm spice with a sandcrawler and a carrier in Dune Awakening. And I know a lot of people are watching this and you're like, you're talking about all this specific stuff about Dune. I'm a World of Warcraft player. I don't understand what you're talking about. And that's fine. Like, you don't need to understand all the intricacies of how Dune works to understand the core that I'm trying to express here, which is that players were able to experience and enjoy 90 to 95% of the gameplay up until that last end bit completely solo. Up until that last end bit, they were able to play it completely solo and then reach the end game. And now it's like, okay, here's all this group stuff that I need to do. And it was like a shock. It was like a big surprise because nothing about the gameplay up until that point had indicated to these players that this was coming in any way. Now, you might be listening to all of this and making the, I would think, very rational assumption that the next thing I'm going to talk about is, well, then obviously there needs to be a lot more solo play available. If these players are like if I'm enjoying the solo play in World of Warcraft and then I run out of solo play to do, then they should add more solo play for me to continue playing as a solo player in WoW. If solo players in Dune Awakening are getting all the way to max and being like, oh, but I liked the game more when I was just soloing it, I don't want to do this group stuff, then maybe the change that needs to happen there is to turn it into a fully solo experience. And while there is logic to that, I don't necessarily believe that's correct. I don't necessarily believe that the concept of in an MMO where there are other players around and there's other, like you're seeing other players out there constantly, you are bumping into them. I don't necessarily believe that the solution is to just make sure that those other players never matter and they're just kind of backdrop. Like the other players that are around are unimportant and they don't matter and you don't care about them. And the reason I feel that way, which I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, is this notion of group progression, this notion of I have friends that also want to be able to complete their tasks and you get some enjoyment yourself. It actually adds content to the game for you in a sense that getting all my friends able to get their stuff that they need, or, you know, going and farming this resource because we need that to make this guy's ornithopter, or going and completing this raid, or doing this Mythic Plus dungeon or whatever, because someone in our group wants this trinket that can drop from it, or anything along those lines. Having those sort of shared goals in that sense is very helpful and very good because it adds additional things for you as a player to like essentially check off of your checklist. It adds more progression for you as a player that isn't necessarily tied to your individual character. Here's what I mean by that. So progression-based games pretty much entirely hinge on the little drips of dopamine that your brain gives you whenever you check off a little object off of a checklist. You've completed a task, you've acquired a thing, you've gotten something, you've invested X amount of time, you have achieved Y result. Your brain goes bing and gives you a little drip of dopamine, and that makes you feel good. And that's why those sorts of games are considered fun. That's why the human being will sit at a game for however many hours a day just to grind for one thing and then finally get it and be like, hooray, that was worth that amount of time. I spent 12 hours trying to get this item and I finally got it. That was worth it. That little drip of dopamine that you get in your brain, that's what makes progression-based games so addicting, and so like that's the fun of them. That's what people enjoy about them. And when you're focused entirely on just your character, your one singular character, that dopamine drip eventually falls off. That eventually you have gotten you've gotten all those little pings that you're going to get for this individual character, at least without extensive additional effort. You've gotten all those little drips that you're going to get, and you start to become bored. You start realizing, I'm not getting those little pings as often anymore. I'm not getting that feeling of hooray, an upgrade. I'm not getting that feeling of hooray, I got this new thing. That's just not happening as much anymore. However, if you have friends who also need things, then you get your brain gives a very, very similar dopamine response to someone that you care about, even if they're just like a friend or whatever. Someone that you like, okay, this is a person who, they're a friend of mine. I like seeing them get good things. Your brain will give you a very similar drip of dopamine whenever they get something that they're after as well. And this is why group-based content in MMORPGs historically has been so important, because it means that you and your group of friends are all collectively giving each other those little dopamine pings constantly. Because yeah, sure, I did a Mythic Plus run and I didn't get anything. I did another M Plus and I didn't get anything. I did another M Plus and I didn't get anything. And you can do that 30 times in a row like that. This is a big part of why I ended up burning out on Mythic Plus this expansion, is because I did a bunch of it and I felt like I wasn't getting anything out of it. And I was like, okay, I'm just pugging these, so I'm not going to just keep pugging these for no reason. I'm not enjoying this experience. If I had a group of friends that I was playing with and I was seeing that group of friends getting upgrades and getting stuff that they cared about and they being excited about that entire time, I would be like, okay, well, I didn't get anything in this run, but my friend did. Or I didn't get anything this run and no one else did, but there's a high chance and possibility that if we do another run, one of us will get something that we're excited about. That feeling of almost tribalism that comes from that sense of being able to have your little group of friends, having your other people that are there who are all also potential targets for those little dopamine pings, is a big part of what keeps people invested, historically at least, in MMORPGs long term. Heck, looking back to my hardcore raiding days back in TBC, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, like that general era when I was just really dug into raiding and going super hard on all of it. There were so many raids that I attended and raid led and everything that there were no drops for me. Like there was nothing I was going to get out of this. Even like I had the mounts and everything from like the like Madness of Deathwing and all that. I had everything there was to get. There were zero potential items that were going to drop for me in this raid for months before we eventually in this case Mists of Pandaria came out. We moved on to the next expansion. There was such a long period of time where there was no reason for me to be doing this, except for the fact that I had a guild and a whole bunch of the people in that guild still wanted items from this. A whole bunch of people in that guild still wanted mounts and so on. They wanted to complete achievements. We had people that were trying to finish their legendary items for it still. Like I had all these other people that were friends of mine and who were people that I cared about whether or not they got their goals achieved as well. That kept me engaged for the game so much longer than if I had just been a purely solo player. And this is why I look at this solo play experience that's happening in games like WoW, in games like Dune, and I'm looking at, yeah, sure, it seems like the obvious thing here is provide more and more stuff for solo players to do, because that's what these players are gravitating towards. They want to do the solo stuff, and thus they are not ending up getting into the group stuff as a result. And while yes, there's probably a bunch of players that would not have continued playing if it wasn't for the solo stuff, there's also probably a bunch of people that would have, like myself, for example, I probably would have pushed harder to find a group of friends to be doing M plus with, or get into a raiding guild that fit my schedule or anything along those lines, if it weren't for the fact that delves were right there and they were scratching enough of that itch for me already. To try to put this in slightly more simplistic terminology, delves were working enough for me that I didn't feel the need to push into group-based content. I was getting enough of that dopamine drip out of doing delves that I didn't feel like it was worth the effort to try to get into group-based content more. I didn't feel like I needed to join a guild. I didn't feel like I needed to get together a squad of people to do Mythic Plus and stuff for. And the result was eventually that drip from delves wore off and I didn't have anything else to fall back on. So I just got bored. And I should note as well that I kind of lump Matchmade / pug like oriented content in the same general bucket here. If I was just pugging M plus, like, sure, yeah, I would have had the potential to get a few more items myself, but I wouldn't care about any of the people that I was grouping with. Not in the like, I hate it, these people are terrible sort of thing, but like if they get an item, I just go, oh, cool, someone got something. But like that's going to be every run. Someone's going to get something. It's not the same as if a friend of mine who I've been doing these runs with and I've built up this friendship with, they get an item instead. It's definitely just not the same. You don't get that same sort of dopamine ping as you do from your friend getting an item when a random that you're probably never going to see again gets one. So even though content that you engage with through a group finder or through matchmaking or by joining pug groups or whatever, even though content that you engage with through that section or through that method does still technically qualify as multiplayer content, it has the same effect of being a largely solo player experience. It has that same feeling of you're just kind of on your own. And yeah, you've joined a group, and yes, your group may be successful, or maybe you're in a bad group or whatever. There is that element of the other players being there, but the progression element that you get from it is purely solo still. The progression of, do I get anything out of this, yes or no, is limited entirely to whether or not you and your character have received anything. Whereas in an organized group, yeah, maybe you go through and you don't get anything, but a couple of your friends got some stuff and you still feel like progress was made as a result. And that feeling of group progression, that feeling of, I don't necessarily need to be the one to receive items, but other people in my group can get them. And because I am part of that group, and because this is my guild, this is my group of friends that's playing this game, I feel as though progress was still made. That feeling of group progression is a big part of what keeps people interested in and playing and enjoying MMORPGs well beyond any sort of extent that purely solo player experience can provide to them. Now, of course, there is also the counter argument to make that maybe you wouldn't even been playing the game in the first place if it wasn't for the solo experience. Like maybe group content, maybe joining a guild was never in the cards for me in the War Within. That just wasn't going to happen in the first place. So the fact that Delves was there, or were there, Delves was, were, whatever, grammar, who cares anyway? The fact that Delves were there, maybe that kept me playing a lot longer than I would have. Maybe I would have quit War Within immediately after the campaign if it wasn't for the fact that Delves were giving me something to do. And while that's almost certainly the case for a large number of players, it's almost certainly a lot of players who would have quit WoW much earlier on, would have quit the War Within much earlier on if it wasn't for the fact that Delves were continuing to give them some solo progress after they had completed all the rest of the solo content in the game. These people would never have gone into Mythic Plus. They never would have joined a raiding guild. That was just never going to happen for them. So Delves, for those players, gave them something to continue doing beyond the point where they normally would have quit. That's almost certainly absolutely the case. I just have to ask if there is a similar group of people, and which group of people is the larger group of people at the end of the day, that because Delves were there and were able to give somebody just enough of that dopamine hit that they didn't feel the need to progress into group content, would they have done that if it wasn't for the fact that Delves were there, and other solo content and other games and so on? Would they have made that jump and then just didn't because this solo option was available to them? And I don't know that I have an answer to that question, to be completely honest. This is very much a sort of, I'm curious. This is a discussion topic. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is this the case that there's a group of players that would have continued playing this game much longer if something had pushed them into group content, or if continuing along with solo content hadn't been such an easy path of low resistance? Or are these people that would have quit this game a lot earlier anyway, and thus the fact that the solo content continued for them kept them going much longer? Like going back to the Dune example, while yes, I feel pretty strongly that the game kind of screwed up by not really pushing the player into anything group oriented until the extreme end game where it suddenly become pretty much mandatory. The fact is, you could easily make an argument that a lot of the players who, like, if you had started having to group up for things around tier 4 or 5 instead of all the way up in tier 6 in Dune, would players have just been quitting at those tiers instead? Or would it have been something where they sort of gradually grew into it? And if it was well done enough, obviously, would they have been like, okay, I guess I'll find one person to go and do this run with me, and now we're getting these resources. Now I need to find 2 or 3 people to do this run with me, and now we're getting these resources. And thus been more mentally prepared for that shift from you can do absolutely everything by yourself to you probably want 4 or 5 people going with you at all times. And I'm really curious what you all think on this topic as well. I'm again, very much this show is meant to be a discussion. Obviously, I'm the one like making and rendering the video and putting it out there, but I do read all the comments, and I greatly, greatly appreciate all the different perspectives and everything that tends to come by whenever I put one of these thoughts out here and ask one of these questions. I really want to hear from you guys what you think on it as well. So please do leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Is solo play the only reason that you're still playing the game? Is solo play something that you probably would have gotten into group gameplay, but you felt like you didn't need to as a result of that? Is this something that you look and say, nah, too much is soloable these days, and I want it to only be something like very classic WoW style? I want it to only be the case that if you want to continue progressing past a certain point, you need to join a group, and there's just nothing for you to do unless you join a group. I don't know. There's a lot to think about on all this, and I would very much like to hear all of your thoughts as well. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video there. Thank you all so much for watching and hanging out. Please do, again, I'll remind, please do go ahead and subscribe if you have not already. Every little button click that this channel gets while it's still getting off on its feet here is super, super helpful. So please do keep that coming. Leave comments, share things, subscribe, hit the notification thing, the ring the bell, I think is what people say. I don't know. But any of that you can do really does help a whole lot. Also, huge shout out to my patrons. If it was not for my patrons, this channel shift wouldn't have even been a thing in the first place, because I would not have been able to justify doing it. So thank you so much, to all of my patrons. If you are not a patron, please do check out patreon.com/Devilor. You can go over there. You can sign up. You can get a few fun little perks, such as early access to each episode. It's basically as soon as I'm done editing, I immediately post this to Patreon. And a few other fun little perks like audio only versions of the show that you can listen to on things like Spotify as well. So please do go check that out. But I'm going to stop rambling there. Thanks again so much, everybody. I'll see you later.